America, a beacon of liberty and opportunity. Yet this shining image is forever stained by a dark and brutal past, slavery. For over 2 centuries, the foundation of this nation was built upon the backs of enslaved Africans, their forced labor fueling the engine of American prosperity and growth. This is a story of unimaginable cruelty and suffering, but also one of incredible resilience, resistance, and the enduring fight for freedom. From the arrival of the first Africans in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 to the abolition of slavery in 1865, this institution shaped the social, political, and economic landscape of the United States. It is a period that continues to haunt us today, its legacy woven deeply into the fabric of our nation. This is the story of slavery in America, a story that must be told, remembered, and learned from. It is a story that challenges us to confront the sins of our past and to strive for a more just and equitable future for all. The year was 1619. It was a time of exploration, colonization, and the beginning of a dark chapter in human history. A Dutch ship arrived on the shores of Jamestown, Virginia, a small but growing English settlement in the New World. This ship carried a cargo that would forever alter the course of American history, 20 African captives. These individuals were the first of many who would be forcibly brought to the American colonies. These individuals, stolen from their homes and families, were part of a larger, tragic narrative. They were torn from their communities, their lives disrupted in the most violent ways imaginable. Upon arrival, they were sold into forced labor, marking the beginning of chattel slavery in the American colonies. This system of slavery was unlike any other, as it treated human beings as personal property that could be bought, sold, and inherited. This event ignited the transatlantic slave trade, a vast and brutal enterprise that would span centuries and continents. The transatlantic slave trade was a brutal and inhumane system that would transport millions of Africans across the Atlantic to the Americas. These voyages were marked by unimaginable suffering and loss. For over 2 centuries, European powers, including England, Portugal, Spain, and France, engaged in this horrific trade. They were driven by greed and a lust for profit, seeing the exploitation of African lives as a means to economic gain. The greed and profit driving the transatlantic slave trade were insatiable. European merchants and traders saw the immense wealth that could be generated from the labor of enslaved Africans, and they pursued it with ruthless efficiency. The Middle Passage, the perilous voyage across the Atlantic, became a symbol of the horrors of slavery. It was a journey fraught with danger, suffering, and death. The horrors of the Middle Passage were many. Packed tightly into the hulls of ships, Africans endured unimaginable conditions: disease, starvation, dehydration, and brutal treatment at the hands of their captors. The cramped conditions in the hulls of slave ships were designed to maximize profit, with little regard for the lives of those being transported. Africans were packed in so tightly that they could barely move, leading to the spread of disease and death. Disease, starvation, dehydration, and brutal treatment were common during the Middle Passage. Captors showed no mercy, and the journey was a test of endurance and survival. Millions perished during this journey, their bodies tossed overboard into the unforgiving ocean. The Atlantic became a graveyard for countless souls who never saw the shores of the New World. Those who survived the Middle Passage were sold into slavery, their lives forever changed. They were thrust into a world of forced labor, oppression, and dehumanization. They were stripped of their names, their cultures, their families, and their freedom. The process of enslavement was designed to erase their identities and break their spirits. They became commodities, bought and sold like property, their humanity disregarded. The slave trade reduced people to mere objects of economic value. Their labor fueled the growth of the American economy. Enslaved Africans worked in plantations, mines, and households, contributing to the wealth and development of the colonies and later the United States. The economic impact of slavery on American society was profound. The wealth generated from the labor of enslaved Africans helped build the infrastructure and institutions of the nation. The legacy of slavery continues to shape modern America. The injustices and inequalities that began with the transatlantic slave trade have left a lasting impact on society. Today, efforts to remember and address the history of slavery are ongoing. Memorials, museums, and educational programs seek to honor the memory of those who suffered and to educate future generations about this dark chapter in history. As we reflect on the history of Jamestown and the transatlantic trade, it is important to recognize the resilience and strength of those who endured such unimaginable hardships. Their stories are a testament to the human spirit and a call to action for social justice and equality. The fight for racial equality and justice continues today. The legacy of slavery is a reminder of the work that still needs to be done to create a more just and equitable society for all. By coming together to celebrate diversity and unity, we can honor the memory of those who suffered and work towards a future where all people are treated with dignity and respect. The arrival of the first Africans in Jamestown is a pivotal moment in American history. It is a reminder of the complexities and contradictions of the nation's past and a call to acknowledge and learn from that history. Education is key to understanding and addressing the legacy of slavery. By teaching future generations about this history, we can ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten and that we continue to strive for a more just and equitable world. Engaging in discussions about history and social justice is essential for creating a more inclusive and understanding society. By listening to and learning from each other, we can build a future that honors the dignity and humanity of all people. Celebrating cultural heritage and history is a way to honor the contributions and resilience of those who came before us. It is a reminder of the strength and diversity that make our society vibrant and dynamic. Memorials dedicated to the victims of the transatlantic slave trade serve as powerful reminders of the past. They are places of reflection, remembrance, and a commitment to never forget the atrocities that were committed. As we look to the future, it is important to come together to build a better world. By acknowledging the past and working towards justice and equality, we can create a society where all people are valued and respected. The story of Jamestown and the transatlantic trade is a story of pain and suffering, but it is also a story of resilience and hope. As the sun rises over Jamestown, it symbolizes the possibility of renewal and the promise of a brighter future for all. Remembering the past is essential for shaping the future. By learning from history, we can work towards a world where justice, equality, and human dignity are upheld for all. The end of this chapter is not the end of the story. It is a call to action to continue the work of building a more just and equitable world. Thank you for watching. Let us honor the memory of those who suffered and strive to create a better future for all. Produced by your production company, in association with partner organization Copyright Year, all rights reserved. The American South, with its vast plantations and fertile land, became synonymous with slavery. The sprawling estates, often stretching over thousands of acres, were the epicenters of agricultural production, primarily driven by the labor of enslaved Africans. These plantations were not just farms, they were complex systems of oppression and exploitation. It was here that the institution took its most brutal and dehumanizing form. The Southern economy thrived on the backs of enslaved people, whose labor was extracted through violence and coercion. The wealth and prosperity of the plantation owners stood in stark contrast to the suffering of those who worked the land. Enslaved Africans were forced to toil from sunup to sundown, their days marked by an unending cycle of grueling work. From the first light of dawn until the last glimmer of dusk, they labored under the watchful eyes of overseers, who were quick to punish any perceived slacking or disobedience. Their lives were consumed by back-breaking labor in the fields of cotton, tobacco, rice, and indigo. Each crop brought its own set of challenges and hardships. Cotton, with its thorny bolls, tore at their hands, while the sweltering heat of the rice paddies left them vulnerable to disease and exhaustion. Life on a plantation was one of relentless hardship and deprivation. The daily grind was unyielding and the physical toll was immense. Enslaved people were expected to meet impossible quotas, and failure to do so often resulted in severe punishment. Enslaved people were housed in cramped and unsanitary quarters, often separated from their families. These living conditions were designed to break their spirits and keep them in a state of constant subjugation. The lack of privacy and the overcrowded spaces added to their misery. They endured meager rations, inadequate clothing, and constant surveillance. The food provided was barely enough to sustain them, and the clothing was often insufficient to protect them from the elements. Every aspect of their lives was controlled and monitored. The physical and psychological abuse inflicted upon enslaved people was relentless. The overseers and masters used fear as a tool to maintain control, employing brutal methods to keep the enslaved population in check. Whippings, beatings, and other forms of torture were commonplace, used to enforce obedience and crush any sign of resistance. The scars left by these punishments were not just physical but also psychological, serving as a constant reminder of their subjugation. Families were torn apart as children were sold away from their parents and husbands from their wives. The threat of being separated from loved ones was a constant source of fear and anguish. This cruel practice was used to weaken familial bonds and prevent any unified resistance. The inherent cruelty of the system was designed to dehumanize and break the spirit of enslaved people, stripping them of their dignity and humanity. The constant degradation and humiliation were meant to reinforce their status as property rather than human beings. Yet even in the face of such unimaginable suffering, the spirit of enslaved Africans could not be extinguished. Their resilience and determination to survive were remarkable. They found ways to resist, both overtly and covertly, and to maintain their sense of self-worth. They found solace and strength in their families, their communities, and their faith. These connections provided a source of comfort and a means of preserving their cultural heritage. Religion in particular offered hope and a sense of purpose, helping them to endure the hardships they faced. They held on to hope, clinging to the belief that one day they would be free. This hope was a powerful force, driving them to persevere despite the overwhelming odds. The dream of freedom sustained them through the darkest times, and their enduring spirit laid the foundation for future generations to continue the fight for justice and equality. The desire for freedom burned brightly in the hearts of enslaved Africans. From the moment they were captured and forced onto slave ships, they resisted their captivity. Acts of defiance, both large and small, were a constant throughout the history of slavery in America. These acts of resistance were not just physical, but also psychological, as enslaved people found ways to maintain their dignity and humanity in the face of brutal oppression. They sang songs of hope, told stories of freedom, and held onto their cultural traditions, all as forms of silent rebellion against their captors. Some enslaved people resisted by slowing down their work, breaking tools, or feigning illness. These subtle acts of sabotage were ways to disrupt the plantation economy and assert some control over their own lives. Others took more drastic measures, risking their lives to escape. They fled north to freedom on the Underground Railroad, a clandestine network of safe houses and abolitionists who aided their journey. This network was a beacon of hope, offering a glimmer of freedom in a world of oppression. The bravery of those who escaped and those who assisted them cannot be overstated. They navigated treacherous terrain, evaded slave catchers, and relied on the kindness of strangers, all in the pursuit of freedom. Rebellions, though infrequent, sent shockwaves of fear through the South. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, in which enslaved people killed over 50 white people, highlighted the desperation and the burning desire for freedom that simmered beneath the surface of Southern society. This rebellion was one of the most significant and violent uprisings in the history of American slavery. It demonstrated the lengths to which enslaved people were willing to go to fight for their freedom. The aftermath of the rebellion led to harsher laws and increased repression, but it also fueled the abolitionist movement, as more people began to see the moral imperative to end slavery. The abolitionist movement, spearheaded by courageous individuals like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and William Lloyd Garrison, played a pivotal role in turning the tide against slavery. Through their impassioned speeches, writings, and activism, they exposed the horrors of slavery and galvanized public opinion against this inhumane institution. Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved person himself, used his eloquence and powerful oratory to advocate for the abolition of slavery. Harriet Tubman, known as the Moses of her people, led countless enslaved people to freedom through the Underground Railroad. William Lloyd Garrison, through his newspaper, The Liberator, tirelessly campaigned for the immediate emancipation of all enslaved people. These individuals, along with many others, formed a formidable force that challenged the status quo and fought for justice and equality. Their legacy is a testament to the power of resistance and the enduring human spirit in the fight for freedom.